Back when the east coast of colonial America had only a paltry population of 50,000 British settlers, on the other side of the planet, the Dutch were turning their sights on a new colonial ambition. That was South Africa. As was standard procedure in that era, the Dutch explorers that arrived on this never-before-explored region of the so-called Dark Continent did not bring their wives and families with them. Doing so would be foolish, of course, with the colonists not knowing what kind of death or danger could await them in this newly discovered territory. Soon after first contact with the native Khoisan people of the region, the progression of colonialism and subjugation commenced. The Dutch, not having brought their families on the 6,000-mile journey that could take up to 2 months of travel in those days, had then decided to mingle with the native peoples of the Cape of Good Hope, creating the beginnings of a pristine racial group that now makes up around 9% of the current population of South Africa at around 5 million people. In contemporary South African society, this group is known as the Cape Coloureds, and they're probably one of the most interesting groups of humans that I've ever heard of. They've frequently been called the most diverse ethnic group in the world. That is, if you could even call them an ethnic group. I would just like to point out that I do have respect for every single people group in the world and treat everyone equally, regardless of race, but I do have a special place in my heart for ethnic groups of multiracial descent, for obvious reasons. And the Cape Coloureds are probably the most multiracial group of people on the planet. As stated previously, the Cape Coloureds first came into existence in the late 1600s as a result of contact between mostly Khoisan women and European, almost entirely Dutch, men. But that's not the only groups that they're mixed with. The Dutch also had Bantu groups like the Zulu and Xhosa imported into the Cape, and further intermingling commenced. The Cape Coloureds had a separate status from pure-blooded Europeans, and were considered a lower class. However, much like the Mestizos, a mixed group of Spanish and Native American heritage in early Latin America, they were given preferential treatment over the native Khoisan and Bantu peoples, and even early Asian immigrants brought into the region. The Cape Coloureds also infrequently mixed with the Afrikaners of South Africa, so today about 7% of Afrikaner DNA is actually from a non-European source. It was also common for Afrikaners that had been in the region for a long time to have distant ancestry from Asia and Africa, since many early Dutch explorers brought Indian and Southeast Asian women with them for relations, with many South African politicians having such admixture, although it would be impossible to tell just by looking at them. Ironically, or perhaps coincidentally, F.W. de Klerk, the Afrikaner politician most famous for abolishing apartheid in South Africa, was well aware of his distinct Khoisan and Indian ancestry. The genetic makeup of Cape Coloureds varies extremely, as can be seen in this graph, which shows that the percentage of African ancestry that can be found vary from nearly 80% to only 20% in the lightest of colors. But on average, the Cape Coloureds are about 36% European, 31% Khoisan, 17% Bantu, 8% Indian, and about 8% East Asian or Southeast Asian. Also, it does depend on where the Coloureds are from. For instance, Coloureds from the Cape would probably have more Khoisan ancestry, while a Coloured from Durban in KwaZulu-Natal would probably have more Indian and Bantu ancestry. The maternal ancestry of the Coloureds, meaning DNA passed down by the females, is mostly Khoisan, while the paternal DNA is overwhelmingly European in origin. Now, although the label Cape Coloured is used almost exclusively for people descended from that first group of Dutch settlers and Khoisan natives, in today's South Africa, a colored person could be anyone that is of multiracial ancestry, with interracial marriage actually being at an all-time high. So because of this loosely defined definitions, Coloureds can vary wildly in appearance since they have DNA from so many diverse groups of humans, and technically someone such as myself, who only has about 25% African DNA, could technically be considered colored if I were to go to South Africa, although I'm not sure how strict their laws are on racial identification. I'm guessing it's just whatever you self-describe as on the census. So before the end of apartheid, colored South Africans were segregated away from the whites, which had an unintended side effect of creating vast sprawls in the city of Cape Town that are populated virtually entirely by the Cape Coloureds. Although there is no longer any legal segregation by race in South Africa, these areas are unfortunately extremely overcrowded and decrepit in most cases, and are populated by poor colored families. This toxic environment has led to the rise of drug smuggling, prostitution, and new South African gangs. But not all Cape Coloureds live in cramped living spaces in the outer slums of Cape Town. Almost the entirety of the province of Western Cape, along with most of Northern Cape and parts of Eastern Cape, are also inhabited by the Cape Coloureds. So relative to their population, the Cape Coloureds inhabit a rather large swath of land, formerly inhabited by Khoisan hunters known as Bushmen, and the Coloureds now universally speak Afrikaans, often with their own accent that makes it a little difficult for the Afrikaners to understand them. Now, there is a subgroup of Coloureds in Cape Town known as the Cape Malays, who actually aren't really Malaysian at all. They're another multiracial group descended from mostly Indonesian traders, along with input from India, Africa, and Europe. Their genetic makeup is about 42% Asian, 40% African, and 18% European. And they're one of the only ethnic groups in South Africa that actually overwhelmingly practices Islam, and they frequently write in the Arabic script because of their religion. Nearby in the region outside of South Africa, there are actually a group of colored people with similar history to those from the Cape. The Rehoboth Basters, also known as just the Basters or the Rehobothers, are a mixed-race ethnic group from neighboring Namibia who are descended from Afrikaner men who had children with a group of Khoisan women after trekking to northern Namibia in the 1700s. They currently number about 40 to 50,000 people, or about 2 to 3% of Namibia's population. Their name, Baster, comes from the Dutch bastard because the original Rehobothers were considered bastards since they were born illegitimately and were considered half-breeds. The Basters to this day do not consider this to be derogatory or demeaning, and claim the name of Rehoboth Basters with pride. Their DNA consists of about 48% European, 38% Khoisan, 9% Bantu, and 5% Asian. The Golfo People are yet another mixed-race ethnic group composed of either English or Afrikaner paternal ancestry and Shona or other Bantu maternal ancestry. They reside in the former British protectorate of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, which dissolved into the current independent states of Malawi, Zambia, and good old Zimbabwe. They probably make up around 100,000 people currently, yet many have fled because of the increasingly racist and xenophobic atmosphere and policies enacted by Zimbabwean dictator, President Robert Mugabe. As opposed to the Cape Coloureds of South Africa, or the Rehoboth Basters of Namibia, most Goffals of the former Rhodesia live in urban areas, most of the time in gated communities next to whites or Asians. So the colored people groups of Southern Africa are extremely diverse, not at all being a homogeneous ethnic group like the census would imply. They can have ancestry from nearly every single corner of the globe, and they have a truly unique history. And that's why they're one of the coolest groups of people on the planet, in my book. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you're a colored person of any kind living in Southern Africa, I'd love to hear your experiences. This has been Mason. I'll see you next time.